Alison Lagrange. We'll be focusing on Kenya tonight. It is a country in crisis right now. There is violence on the streets of the capital. Even the parliament and public offices have been targeted. The riot cops are also out in full force. They are using tear gas and water cannons. To put it simply, Nairobi resembles a war zone. What led to this deadly spike in violence? What is the government doing about it? That's our top story on the show. Meanwhile, in Canada, the Khalistan saga continues. A new media report has exposed the threat of Sikh extremism, especially that of Hardip Singh Nar. It says Nar had been placed on a no-fly list. He had also been questioned multiple times by Canadian police. So did Justin Trudeau's government know how dangerous he was? If so, why didn't they act against him? We'll be discussing that. Meanwhile, China is complaining about decoupling. Western countries are taking their business out of China, but Beijing says it's a zero-sum game. We'll tell you why. In the Ukraine war, allegations of sabotage. Germany says Russia is targeting arms supplies to Kiev. How will this affect Ukraine's defense? In France, President Macron is warning of a civil war. Is this a desperate politics or a genuine threat? All this and more lined up. But first, the headlines. Indian Prime Minister Narendra Modi set to travel to Russia next month for the annual India-Russia summit. This will be Prime Minister Modi's first bilateral foreign trip in his third term. It will also be the Indian Prime Minister's first visit to Russia in 5 years. The European Union launches accession negotiations with Ukraine and Moldova. This sets the stage toward the bloc's membership for the former Soviet states, a move that Moscow has tried to block. Ukraine and its neighbor Moldova lodged their bids to join the EU after Russia's attack in 2022. Israel's top court rules that the state must draft ultra-Orthodox Jewish men to military service. This decision could upend Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu's ruling coalition. So far, ultra-Orthodox Jews have been granted sweeping exemptions from mandatory service. They make up around 13% of Israel's nearly 10 million citizens. Iran's Supreme Leader Ayatollah Ali Khamenei calls for high participation in Friday's presidential election. The winner will replace Ebrahim Raisi, who died in a helicopter crash last month. Voters have the choice between 6 candidates who were selected by the Guardian Council, which is an unelected body dominated by conservatives. And celebrations erupt in multiple cities in Afghanistan after their cricket team reaches the T20 World Cup semi-final for the first time ever. They beat Bangladesh in a nail-biting quarter-final, and Afghanistan will now face South Africa in the semi-final on Thursday. We begin today with Kenya, where the situation has descended into chaos. Protesters breached Kenya's parliament building today. They set parts of it on fire and destroyed the furniture inside. Take a look.
Mr. Speaker, sir, I'm here to address you. You must go. Ruto must go. We don't fear you guys. You hypocrites. We don't fear you. Mr. Speaker, we don't fear you. Tukondani, we stomped inside.
But what prompted this? The protests had started peacefully today. Protesters were singing and dancing. Chanting that they were peaceful. So then what led to the Kenyan protesters finally losing their cool? Now reports say it was police brutality, like this. As usual, the police began with tear gas and water cannons. They've been using this against protesters for days. But today, the police allegedly resorted to live bullets as well. At least 10 people have been killed. Dozens are injured. Live rounds were fired at the protesters who had gathered around Parliament to demonstrate. They had gathered to urge their MPs to reject Kenya's new finance bill. But they were greeted with bullets. While the MPs voted for the new finance bill anyway. Now let's rewind a bit to see why this bill sparked the violence that you just saw. Kenya's finance bill is their annual budget. It is passed for the duration of a financial year, from the 1st of July to the 30th of June 2025. Kenya's parliament was discussing the next finance bill, the budget for 2024 to 25. And what they have come up with has angered the Kenyan people. Initially, they had proposed a slew of new taxes to generate $2.7 billion in additional revenue. The first draft of the finance bill proposed taxes on bread, cooking oil, motor vehicles, sanitary pads, diapers, changing a cell phone plan. Basically, these taxes would have affected everyone. About a third of Kenya's people live in poverty. And the country has been suffering for the past few years. Like most other countries, it was devastated by the COVID-19 pandemic. Then came the war in Ukraine, leading to a cost of living crisis. This was followed by 2 consecutive droughts and a depreciation of the currency, the Kenyan shilling. All of these factors combined have brought the people to a breaking point. And the final straw was the new finance bill with its unending taxes. This bill is championed by Kenya's President William Ruto. Ruto came to power in 2022. And he has been raising taxes ever since.
They have
Now, this latest finance bill is a continuation of his policies. Ruto says that the new taxes are necessary, that Kenya needs the money, mostly to pay off debt. Kenya's public debt is at about 68% of its GDP. That is dangerously high. About 37% of Kenya's annual revenue goes into servicing these debts. And this problem has been made worse recently. Because of Kenya's depreciating currency, the debts are repaid in US dollars. So if the Kenyan shilling depreciates, the debt burden increases, which is exactly what has been happening. This is why Ruto wants to raise taxes, to reduce Kenya's debt burden. His plan has been endorsed by some of Kenya's creditors, most notably the International Monetary Fund. The IMF is a creditor. It wants to get its money back, so it has backed Kenya's new finance bill. And this has led to even more public anger. Some Kenyans felt that instead of working for them, Ruto was working for the IMF. All this anger culminated in the protests that you just saw today. Kenya's parliament met for the new finance bill's third reading. This had amended the original bill last Tuesday, removed some more of the contentious taxes. But for the protesters, the bill was already tainted. They wanted the bill rejected and a new one drawn up in its place. However, Ruto's ruling coalition has a majority in parliament. They rammed the bill through anyway, with 195 votes for and 106 votes against. The bill will now go to Ruto's office. If he signs it, it will become law. And looking at Ruto's track record, this is almost certain to happen. And that is why the protesters were desperate to get into parliament. They wanted to stop the MPs from sending the bill to Ruto. And that is why violence erupted at the Kenyan parliament building today. Now, the levee has been breached now. The once peaceful protests have been marred by violence. And we'll see how the authorities react over the next few days. But Ruto should be wary. If he signs the finance bill now, the people of Kenya may never forgive him. Now let's turn to Canada. The Khalistan row continues to gather momentum. It was a major political issue last year. Trudeau accused India of killing a Khalistani in Canada. His name was Hardip Singh Nar. New Delhi considered him to be a terrorist, but Trudeau disagreed. He believed it was an issue of free speech. However, that defense is now looking weak. Canadian media has just published an exhaustive investigation. It takes a deep dive into Nijar's life, his childhood in Punjab, his links to Khalistanis, his escape from India, and his new career in Canada. The report has quotes from Nijar's so-called sermons. Let me quote one of them. "We will have to take up arms. We will have to dance to the edges of swords. Those who advocate peaceful methods, we need to leave them behind. What justice will we get this way?" It doesn't sound like activism. It sounds like a call to violence. And that's not all. Nijar had close ties to members of the KTF. That's the Khalistan Tiger Force, a terror group designated by India. Apparently, Nijar was asked to head this organization, but for some reason he declined. Nijar also ran some military camps in Canada. He trained Khalistani youth to handle weapons. The question is, did Trudeau's government know about this? Chances are they did. Nijar had been placed on a no-fly list. He was questioned multiple times by Canadian cops. Even his bank accounts and businesses had been frozen. So clearly the government was onto something. In 2019, Canada went a step ahead. Their public safety department listed the top 5 terror threats. Among them was Sikh extremism. The likes of Nijar pushed back against this, so Justin Trudeau got involved. Eventually, his government removed Sikh extremism from the list. So the bottom line is quite clear. Canada was well aware of Nijar's politics. He was advocating violence from Canadian soil. Yet the same Canada is honouring Nijar. Last week marked his 1-year death anniversary. Canada's Parliament held a moment of silence for him. Take a look.
Following discussions among representatives of all parties in the House, I understand that there is an agreement to observe a moment of silence in memory of Hardip Singh Nar, assassinated in Surrey, British Columbia, 1 year ago today. I now invite honourable members to rise.
Not everyone supports this. Some of Trudeau's own MPs opposed the Parliament's move. They said Nijar wasn't worth celebrating.
Many Canadians are not aware that even today, the ideology responsible for this terrorist attack is still alive among few people in Canada. Recent celebration of assassination of Hindu Indian Prime Minister Indira Gandhi by Khalistan supporters, glorifying violence and hate, shows that the dark forces have been energized again and point to a dreadful times ahead.
The problem is denial. To tackle terrorism, Trudeau must acknowledge it. Consider what happened this weekend. Sunday marked the 39th anniversary of the Air India bombing in 1985. A flight was heading to India from Canada, but Khalistani terrorists bombed it. They killed 329 innocent people, out of which 280 were Canadian citizens. This incident was the worst terror attack in Canada's history. To mark the anniversary, Trudeau released a statement. And guess what is missing from it? Any mention of Khalistan. It's like talking about 9/11 without mentioning bin Laden. The question is, why? What explains Trudeau's reluctance to condemn Khalistanis? Now, in one word, politics. There are more than 770,000 Sikhs in Canada. They are a powerful political bloc. Not all of them support the Khalistan movement, but those who do make a lot of noise. A prime example of that is Hardip Singh Nar. Now, he would speak at Sikh community events, train young Sikh men, and give sermons in temples, so Trudeau and other Canadian politicians caught them. Recently, the Prime Minister attended a Sikh event in Toronto. As he walked up to the mic, the crowd began chanting Khalistani slogans. Take a look. Now we have more examples. The Khalistani tableau glorify the assassination of Indira Gandhi, India's former Prime Minister who was killed by her Sikh bodyguard. Last week, a mock trial was held for Prime Minister Narendra Modi. He was called a murderer by Khalistanis, yet Canada has failed to act. It's a dangerous policy for Justin Trudeau. He may think Khalistanis are his allies, but they will not hesitate to attack Canada. Now let's talk about China. It is caught in a tussle over trade with the West. The US and Europe are raising complaints. They claim China is overproducing and dumping goods. Today, the Chinese premier delivered a speech. Li Qiang pushed back against the Western allegations.
We should keep an open mind, work closely together, reject bloc confrontation, oppose decoupling and disconnection, maintain the stability and smoothness of industrial and supply chains, and promote trade and investment liberalization and facilitation.
Premier Li is sending a tough message to the West. Now, he is challenging their push to decouple from China. Premier Li says this will drag the world into a destructive spiral. Strong words indeed. What is Premier Li concerned about? The Western tariffs. Now, US and Europe want to restrict the flow of Chinese imports. Their biggest concerns are the Chinese electric vehicles, or EVs. There is a growing face-off over EVs. The West is keen on imposing duties on them, and the US has proposed an import duty of 100%, the EU 38%. America is far more aggressive in its approach. It is going beyond Chinese EVs. It is targeting more Chinese products, like the batteries for electric cars, supply of critical minerals, and solar cells. Each of these products now face higher import taxes. Europe tried to adopt a tougher line as well, but it has faced a fierce pushback from Beijing. This week, both sides announced they'll start negotiations. Beijing is threatening Brussels. It is issuing ultimatums. China wants the EU to drop the EV tariffs. It has even issued a deadline, the 4th of July. What if Brussels doesn't comply? Now, Chinese officials are threatening retaliation. For starters, they have European pork on their radar.
The Ministry of Commerce has legally initiated an anti-dumping investigation on imports of pork and byproducts from the European Union on June 17, 2024. According to WTO rules and China's anti-dumping regulations, it's confirmed from our preliminary investigation that the dumping is established and causes damage to domestic industries.
So the trade battle is heating up. Certainly, China is not happy. It doesn't want any trade barriers, especially at this time. China's economy is vulnerable. Economic growth has been sluggish. The Chinese premier is hoping for an improvement this year.
In the first quarter, our economic growth was 5.3% compared to last year, achieving a good beginning. In the second quarter, it is expected to continue the stability and upward trend. We have the confidence and ability to achieve the annual economic growth target of around 5%.
But the numbers tell a different story. Take real estate, for example. It is one of China's key growth engines. It accounts for 30% of China's economic activity, but the sector is not firing. Earlier this year, China tried to rescue the sector. It unveiled a stimulus package. Local governments were asked to raise money and buy up fledgling real estate projects. It was a rescue of sorts, but the plan has failed to deliver. Home prices in China continue to decline. Last month, they saw their largest drop. This is the steepest fall in close to a decade. So far, the rescue package hasn't worked. Real estate is a weak spot for China's economy, and a full recovery seems like a long shot. At this stage, Beijing doesn't want exports to suffer. Just like real estate, exports are a driver of growth too. Last year, exports accounted for almost 19% of China's economy. A trade war could hurt Chinese exports badly, and that's why Beijing is fighting these tariffs. We say these tariffs are a necessity right now. Global trade needs to be rebalanced. Consider this. China produces a third of the world's manufactured goods. Now that's more than the output of 4 nations combined: the United States, Germany, Japan, and South Korea. So this is not a level playing field. We all know the cost of being too dependent on China. The world saw the impact during the pandemic. Tariffs could help restore balance if Western nations have the will to enforce them. Now let's talk about China's close ally, Russia. Moscow seems to be testing the West. Germany has made a bold claim. It says Russia is trying to sabotage Ukraine's arms supplies. Berlin fears Moscow has ordered operations. Russia could have started a campaign against the West, and it is resorting to espionage, disinformation, and cyber attacks. Is Russia waging a hybrid war against the West? Our next report explores.
In May, a factory in Berlin caught fire. The entire building was engulfed in flames. Over 200 firefighters were rushed to the site to battle the blaze.
Wie kam es zum Brand in einem Metallbetrieb?
We couldn't go into the building from the start because the danger from the chemicals was too great. Even now, especially after the collapse of the building, we can still only extinguish the fire from the outside.
The factory belonged to a German company called Diehl. Diehl is a defense contractor. It's a crucial part of Ukraine's defense supply chain. The company makes the Iris-T missile, which is used by the Ukrainian forces in the battlefield. Initially, German police blamed the fire at Diehl's factory on a technical defect, but Western intelligence officials are challenging this theory now. They suspect Russia was behind this fire. Apparently, Moscow is trying to disrupt the shipment of arms and ammunition to Ukraine, so Russia could be targeting the source by hiring saboteurs and targeting defense suppliers. The fire in Berlin was probably the work of saboteurs too. And it won't be the first incident of its kind. Reports say since the beginning of the war, dozens of such incidents have taken place across Europe. They have aimed to curb arms production, pressure politicians, and create panic. Civilian infrastructure like wind farms and pipelines have been targeted as well. So, how does it work? This report has some insights. It says the Russians are recruiting civilians. In most cases, they are criminals. They are hired through Telegram and in many cases paid through cryptocurrency to avoid detection. European nations are said to be sitting on intelligence that confirm these claims, but they have hesitated in publicly naming and shaming Moscow, mostly to avoid an escalation. But Russia is upping the ante against the West, specifically the United States. On Sunday, a missile struck Sevastopol in Crimea. Russian officials say it killed 4 people, including children. Moscow is blaming both Washington and Kyiv for the strike.
Kyiv regime, supported by the USA, carried out a heinous attack against civilians in the Russian city of Sevastopol in Crimea. Ukraine launched 5 US-supplied Attack-MS missiles armed with cluster munitions.
Russia has called the strike barbaric. It accuses the US of waging a proxy war. Moscow has promised to retaliate. And an escalation in Ukraine seems likely. But from Russia's perspective, even the West is now on its radar.
In a way that
Is France heading for a civil war? It may sound like an unlikely doomsday scenario, but President Emmanuel Macron says it's possible. He made a huge gamble this month. After losing the European elections, Macron announced a snap poll. His plan was straightforward: to regain the trust of voters, to show the world that his centrist party is still popular. Just one problem, though. The gamble appears to be backfiring, which is why Macron is turning up the rhetoric. He was speaking in a podcast recently, and there he targeted both his rivals, the far left and the far right. Macron said that if either of them won, there could be civil war in France. He accused both camps of dividing French people based on religion. Now, this is a big statement to make, especially for the president of a country. So naturally, there's pushback.
Macron hasn't changed a lot. He has held every presidential campaign saying it's either me or chaos. I think the French have realized that he is chaos. He has personified chaos since he was first elected. And I think his comments on civil war is very weak and shows that he knows that he has already lost this election.
For the moment, Macron is the one that has provoked civil war in New Caledonia by having deported into France people who were arrested there. You know, there were 4 Kanak leaders who were arrested there, whatever the reasons were, and they were brought into France, meaning 17,000 kilometers away from their homes.
Hard to argue with that. Now, these comments reflect Macron's desperation. Just look at the opinion polls. The far right is leading the race. They are projected to get 35.5% of the votes. The left-wing coalition is in second. They could get almost 30% of the votes. And Macron centrists, they are projected to get 19.5% of the votes, meaning his coalition could end up in third. Now, the far right may not get a majority of its own, but they have a very strong lead. Polls show that French voters trust them on economy and public finance, which is why Macron is getting desperate. His term as president ends in May of 2027, but he needs a friendly parliament to make laws. Let me explain. France has a semi-presidential system of governance. The president has certain designated powers, like on foreign policy and defense. But on other issues, he needs the parliament's support. I'm talking about issues like immigration and public debt. If the president's party has a majority in parliament, no issues. They can move in lockstep. If not, the parliament can shoot down Macron's proposals. They can make him a lame duck. Just look at the United States. The president, Joe Biden, is a Democrat, but the U.S. House is Republican. As a result, many of Biden's policy proposals are on hold. And in France, it could be worse, because the French parliament is a lot more powerful. Hence all the talk about a civil war. It's not a new strategy for the French president. He has made such alarmist statements before. Let me take you back to April. Macron was laying out his policy on the European Union. There, he gave a dire warning that Europe could die. Listen to this.
Le risque est immense.
We must realize that our Europe today is mortal. It can die. It could die, and that depends entirely on our choices. But these choices must be made now, because what is at stake today is the question of peace and war on our continent, and our ability to guarantee our security or not.
That was before the European elections. Far-right parties were projected to do well, so Macron dropped this alarmist statement. And now he's doing it again. But will it work this time? The opinion polls are saying it won't. If anything, the far right is doing better. We'll know for sure by early July. France will be holding its elections in two stages. First on the 30th of June and second on the 7th of July. Later that month, the Olympics will kick off in Paris, so Macron's prestige is at stake. If he wins, he could take the stage as a resurgent world leader. If not, it could be an embarrassment. Macron may preside over the game as a lame duck president. And all of this makes one thing clear. The decision to call an election was a major gamble. It could make or break Macron's legacy.
Party leaders.
Right, Akash. Thank you so much for bringing us the latest with regards to her health. We'll keep coming back to you for more updates on that story. Right now, shifting focus to another piece of breaking news now coming in. All right, but we have got a reaction also coming in from Sanjay Singh of Aam Aadmi Party. He will give the update about Atishi's health at the moment. Let's take a look at that as well.
तार बिगड़ रहा था और अभी जो रात को इनका शुगर लेवल चेक किया गया, ब्लड शुगर की जो रिपोर्ट आई है वो 43। तो सारे डॉक्टरों की ये सलाह है कि स्थिति इनकी बिगड़ी हुई है और इनको हॉस्पिटल में एडमिट करना बहुत ज़रूरी है, वरना बहुत गंभीर स्थिति हो सकती है, बहुत बुरी हालत हो सकती है। इसलिए डॉक्टरों की सलाह पे इनको एडमिट कराया जा रहा है। मैम अभी कौन से हॉस्पिटल जा रही है? LNJP हॉस्पिटल में एडमिट कराने जा रहे हैं और पिछले 4 दिनों से लगातार आज 5वां दिन हो गया अनशन पे हैं। अन्न का एक दाना नहीं लिया, शुगर लेवल लगातार नीचे जा रहा है, कीटो।
Some big breaking news now coming in. Well, WikiLeaks founder Julian Assange has agreed to plead guilty in the US court to revealing military secrets in exchange for his freedom, ending his years-long legal drama. Assange, who had been in custody in Britain, will plead guilty to a single count of conspiracy to obtain and disseminate national defense information as well. That's the big breaking news now coming in. Another piece of breaking news also coming in. Well, NASA has delayed the return of 2 astronauts from the International Space Station for the 3rd time now, raising probable concerns the crew could be quote-unquote stranded. Butch Wilmore and Sunita Williams were initially scheduled for a 9-day stay, which was then pushed back twice this month and now sits at undetermined date as well. So that's the big breaking news now coming in. Remember, we told you earlier that there are multiple helium leaks happening and Boeing is unable to fix all of those helium leaks as well. That could be a probable reason why NASA has now delayed the return of 2 of the astronauts from the International Space Station for the 3rd time, raising many concerns that the
Now let's turn our attention eastwards to an aeroplane making its way from Thailand to an island in the Pacific Ocean. This plane is transporting Julian Assange, the founder of WikiLeaks, the publisher who exposed US war crimes in Afghanistan and Iraq, and who has been paying the price for over a decade. Assange has been released from prison. He was incarcerated for over 5 years in the UK. But he's out now and on his way to an American overseas territory called the Northern Mariana Islands. There he will stand before an American federal judge. He will plead guilty to 1 charge under the US Espionage Act and then be sentenced to time already served, which means that tomorrow Julian Assange will be a free man. Here's our report.
Julian Assange isn't free yet, but he's on the verge of getting his freedom. He's on the way to an American court, located here, in Saipan, the capital of the Northern Mariana Islands, a US overseas territory in the Pacific Ocean. Thousands of kilometers away from the mainland US, and close to Assange's home country, Australia. Assange agreed to go to the court in Saipan as part of his plea deal, the deal that has been worked out to secure his freedom. In 2010, WikiLeaks, founded by Julian Assange, rose to global prominence because it leaked hundreds of thousands of classified US documents, documents related to America's wars in Iraq and Afghanistan. The documents, videos, and diplomatic cables proved one thing: that American soldiers had committed war crimes, that they had shot down unarmed civilians in Afghanistan and Iraq. What did Assange get for his troubles? What was his reward for exposing American war crimes? Well, he was made an example of, a warning to others looking to expose the US. In November 2010, just months after he exposed the American hypocrisy, a Swedish court ordered his arrest for alleged sex crimes. Assange has denied the accusations, and the Swedes eventually dropped the case, saying there wasn't enough evidence. But the case was used to hound Assange for years. It came while Assange was in the UK. For 2 years, he appealed his extradition to Sweden. And then, when his appeals were exhausted, he fled into the Ecuadorian embassy in London in June 2012. For the next 7 years, Assange stayed inside the Ecuadorian embassy. But then, in April 2019, the Ecuadorians kicked him out. And as soon as he stepped out of the embassy, he was arrested. Why? For skipping bail and entering the embassy back in 2012. It was supposed to be a short stint in prison, under a year for skipping bail. But while he was inside, the US government made its move. It asked Britain to extradite Assange. Washington wanted to charge him under the US Espionage Act, which is usually reserved for US government employees who leak state secrets. So, for the past 5 years, Assange has stayed in a British high-security prison, fighting against the extradition to the US. And it seems that yesterday he finally decided to hang his gloves. He secured bail to fly to the Northern Mariana Islands. He is scheduled to appear at a court in Saipan tomorrow morning. There, he will be pleading guilty to 1 charge under the US Espionage Act in front of an American judge. Reports say that the judge will sentence him for his crime to time already served. meaning the 5 odd years in British prison. After the sentencing, Assange should be a free man, free to return to his home country, Australia, where his family awaits him with cautious optimism.
I feel elated. I also feel worried, because I'm so used to this. Anything could happen. I'm worried that until it's fully signed off, I worry, but it looks like we've got there and Julian's free. So I'll really believe it when I have him in front of me and I can take him and hug him and then it will be real,
For our next story, let's go back in history. It's the 1960s. The moon was uncharted territory. NASA wanted to land on the moon, but it needed to know more about it. That's where Boeing came in. It built 5 lunar orbiters. They orbited the moon. They took pictures of the surface. Not just that, Boeing also constructed the first stage of the Saturn V rocket. So this is a company that helped put men on the moon. But since then, Boeing has lost a lot of credibility. It's seen 2 crashes, multiple accidents, Congress hearings, whistleblower deaths, and 0 accountability. Now later, Boeing is now a dreaded name in aviation. But soon, it could also become a dreaded name in space. It started on the 5th of June. Boeing launched astronauts for the first time. It was acting as a taxi service for NASA. So 2 test pilots blasted off aboard the Starliner capsule. They were Butch Wilmore and Sunita Williams. The Starliner headed to the International Space Station. The journey took 25 hours. On the 6th of June, the astronauts were welcomed at the space station. They were supposed to stay there for a week.
It was such a great welcome, little dance party, and that's the way to get things going. And we're just happy as can be to be up in space. One in Starliner, on an Atlas V, and then here on the International Space Station. It just doesn't get much better.
But that's where the troubles began. You see, the journey may have gone well. However, it wasn't without a hitch. Officials discovered 5 different helium leaks. Now, the leaks that affected Starliner's thruster system. So last week, NASA gave Boeing 4 days. They said, figure it out. What's going on? Boeing scrambled to action, but nothing changed. Since then, the trip back to Earth has been delayed twice. Reports now suggest both Boeing and NASA knew about the faults. They knew about the leaks, about the thruster failing. They knew all of this even before the launch.
We could see at the tank level when the system is opened, essentially you're bleeding helium from the tank all through the flight. And we could see that that leak rate was a little higher than we had thought pre-flight.
So why let it go ahead in the first place? NASA doesn't have an answer for it, but it remains optimistic. It says there is no reason to believe Starliner won't make the journey back home. But the pressure is on right now. In 2014, NASA hired both Boeing and SpaceX. This was to ferry astronauts to the International Space Station. Boeing was the front runner then. It was a big name in aviation, so it was expected to do well. But in the last decade, Boeing's fortunes have taken a turn for the worse, and it showed here too. SpaceX completed its first crewed mission in 2020. It went without any trouble. Since then, it's been ferrying NASA astronauts to the space station. But Boeing has since struggled. The Starliner program faced delays. There were multiple setbacks, and that added to the cost. It cost Boeing an extra expenses of over $1 billion. In 2019, Boeing conducted its first test mission. It was full of troubles. In 2022, it tried again. There was less trouble this time, but it wasn't flawless. Boeing persevered nonetheless. It scheduled this launch with NASA astronauts, and the launch happened. It was the proud moment, but the troubles highlight a bigger problem. Boeing says its Starliner unit is independent from the company's other functions, but it has a lot to prove. The journey back home is not an easy one. In fact, it is the most dangerous stretch of any mission. Why? Because of the Earth's atmosphere. So it's a difficult journey. Plus, the Starliner will travel at more than 22 times the speed of sound. To land, a set of parachutes must slow down the capsule. Only then can it land safely. This is a system Boeing was forced to change last year after safety concerns. So the hurdles are not over. Boeing's initial launch may have boosted the company, but all eyes are on the journey back home. Any misstep could be a costly one for Boeing and its future. Our next story comes from China. It is receiving too much rainfall in the south and not enough in the north. Southern China is witnessing severe floods. At least 71 people have died. Tens of thousands of others have been displaced. Meanwhile, northern China has been hit by a drought amid a heat wave. But China is not alone here. Thanks to climate change, nation after nation is experiencing extreme weather events. Here's a report.
This is southern China, where torrential rains have led to widespread flooding. Heavy rainfall has battered the region for more than a week now. Tens of thousands of people have been displaced. At least 71 people have died, and 50 deaths come from only one province, Guangdong. It has experienced severe flooding. An average of 199 millimeters of rainfall has fallen in the region. In some parts, the highest rainfall totaled 367 millimeters. With no respite in sight, China's weather service has issued its most severe rainstorm alert. But just as the south receives too much rainfall, the north is parched. Since the start of June, North China has seen a persistent heat wave. Rainfall has been scarce, so the region is suffering from a severe drought. Mid-May to mid-June is harvest season in China. This is when the autumn crops are planted, so the drought is a major concern for the agricultural industry.
I hope that the government can reduce the burden on farmers. This is the voice coming from a farmer's heart. It's hard for us to say. It's hard, as you can see.
There is no solution to this water shortage. It can't be solved. This year's drought is terrible. There was a little rain in the previous years, but this year it didn't rain at all.
When it comes to extreme heat, northern China is not alone. South Korea is witnessing its warmest June on record. Heatwave warnings have been issued for 92 regions across the country, with temperatures crossing 37 degrees Celsius. In Europe, several countries are bracing for a heatwave. This includes the UK, France and Germany. While Greece is at the epicenter of Europe's heat, with at least 6 tourists dying there due to the heat.
Obviously, it's really sad that somebody's lost their life. It's really intensely hot, and you need to look after your health and make sure that you take plenty of water and shelter and be very sensible in the heat.
We've heard about the recent deaths of people going out walking in the heat, and it's tragic. It's incredibly sad, but it's not sensible to go out walking alone in the heat with no water. And it's warm, and you're better off sitting in the shade and enjoying the beautiful view.
Greece has been battling wildfires since last week. On top of that, in many areas, temperatures are exceeding 38 degrees Celsius, which is abnormal for the country. This is not a surprise. Climate change has put 2024 on track to be the hottest year on record. From India and Saudi Arabia to the United States and Brazil, many nations are witnessing extreme weather events. With climate change, it won't be long before such scenarios become the new normal.
Have you heard Prancing Queen? It's a pop song, and it sounds almost exactly like Dancing Queen, the iconic song by the Swedish band ABBA. Though even devoted fans would struggle to distinguish it from the authentic song. Prancing Queen is not by ABBA. It has been created by artificial intelligence, and it is one of millions of AI-generated songs, which is why now the biggest players in the music recording industry are out for blood. In a landmark case, they are suing two fast-growing US-based AI music startups, Suno, the creator of Prancing Queen, and Udio, who is behind the lawsuit. The startups have created music based on works of stars like Mariah Carey, Chuck Berry, and Drake. They have let users generate songs with simple text prompts and made money off of it. Some don't mind this. Supporters have compared the AI tools to the way humans learn by reading, hearing, and listening to other works. But record companies claim this is wholesale theft. They say it exploits the works of artists. This has led to a heated discussion on the use of AI. But this is not the first time such a debate has come forth.
I think these tools will unlock huge amounts of new creativity and exploration. I think it will allow people who don't have artistic talent to express their vision of creativity in ways that they otherwise couldn't. I think that's a huge deal. I also think there are real questions about the future of art and the role of creativity in our society that is putting computer-generated derivative generators up against human artists in ways that we really kind of have to grapple with in terms of the ethics and the legal implications of these tools. And so that's a game changer. It is literally the definition of disruptive innovation.
It is indeed disruptive, and this is not limited to the music industry. Interest in AI has exploded globally. Over the past year, journalists, authors, artists, designers, and musicians have pushed back against AI's use of their work. Lawsuits have been filed against many AI companies, including OpenAI, the parent company of ChatGPT. Just months ago, about 200 artists, including Billie Eilish and Nicki Minaj, signed a letter. They call for an end to the quote-unquote predatory use of artificial intelligence. But there hasn't been much change. AI is pushing all kinds of art into a new territory. It is creating new avenues to access art. But in some ways, it is also harming the business of creativity. And it is raising a number of tricky questions. Should AI use works without permission? If not, what should AI train on? Can AI produce copycats of human work and dilute the market? Should the copyright law adapt to AI? The technology moves fast, so where do the limits lie? And how should the guardrails be framed? So a lot of questions, but not enough answers. With lawmakers playing catch-up with AI, chaos is unfolding globally, and ugly lawsuits may only be the beginning of what is to come. Our last story is about the Summer Olympics. It's just around the corner. This year, the Games are taking place in Paris. So the City of Light is brimming with excitement and
Hello and welcome to the late night edition with me, Ayushman Singh Jamwal. Big breaking news coming in with the CBI examined Delhi Chief Minister Arvind Kejriwal inside Tihar jail on Monday is what we are learning, and today they also got the production warrant executed for tomorrow. He will be produced before the court tomorrow is what we are learning. The Aam Aadmi Party has accused the BJP government of hatching a big conspiracy in connivance with the CBI. That is the big piece of breaking news that's coming in, ladies and gentlemen. What we are learning is that the CBI examined Delhi Chief Minister Arvind Kejriwal inside Tihar jail on Monday, and today they also got the production warrant executed for tomorrow. He will be produced before the court tomorrow is what we are learning. So the